So, kicking off the show, I want to talk about the war that is going on in sports. And it's starting off with the NFC Championship game because that was just a nightmare for Detroit on a number of reasons. And the biggest reason that I found with it was something that I touched on last week. Didn't touch on it for long, but I touched on it enough, thinking that baseball and basketball were really the only ones affected. Baseball has been totally consumed by it, whereas basketball, it's getting there. It's getting to that point. I didn't think football was going to be consumed or taken part because there's really been no instance of it yet. But nerds and analytics in sports are starting to creep in to football. America's favorite, America's game, football. Nerds are starting to invade. And let me get into that because there were two situations where this blew up. Okay. It started with 4th and 2 from the plus 28. For those of you, the plus 28 is San Francisco's 28-yard line. So they had 28 yards to go before they could score a touchdown. With 7 minutes and 40 seconds remaining on the clock in the third quarter, up 14 points. Okay. So it's 4th and 2. Now, according to the two articles that I found, you have the next one of them by Ben Slowick talks about it from The Ringer, talks about the next gen stats. And they say the next gen stats, you have an 86.8% chance to win if you go for it. Okay. If you kick it and you go up 3 scores, you have an 85.8% chance of winning. And so what happened? They went for it, and Reynolds was relatively open, but he dropped the pass, and it was a turnover on downs. The second point, or the second area that this was a big thing was it was 4th and 3 from San Francisco's 30-yard line for Detroit. It was a plus 30. With 7.5 remaining in the game, and this time Detroit is down 3. So they were up 21, but now find themselves down 3 points. And the next gen stats had to say for this that if you go for it, Detroit has a 32.7% chance of winning. And if they kicked it, Detroit has a 30.2% chance of winning. So what happened? Well, they went for it. Dan Campbell is rah-rah Dan, big fan of Dan Campbell. But they went for it, and Goff got flushed out to his right and underthrew his receiver for a second turnover on downs. So I wanted to let you know, and in case you didn't watch the NFC Championship game, because let's face it, NFC, New England Pats are in the AFC. They're not in it. That's, if you didn't watch it, that's fine. Those are the two moments. Okay. So in that first article by Ben Slowick from The Ringer, he talks about how those are the stats. Okay. And with you being up 14 points, and if you went for it, again, didn't even say that you would get it. It just says if you go for it, you would win 86.8% of the time. Versus if you kick it and go up 3 scores, then you'll win 85.8% chance of the time. So when I read that, I thought to myself, you cost your team over 1%. 1% was the number that you were like, yep, we have to go for it. It just absolutely makes all the sense in the world. And then, of course, you don't get it. You win for it. You don't get it. You demoralize your team. And you know how I know that the team got demoralized? Because 2 plays later, the Niners come up with this miraculous catch. Detroit's defensive back boxed out Brandon Ayuk, had the ball right here. The problem was his hands were like this, and the ball is like this. So what happens? The ball comes in, doink, hits off his helmet, bounces right to Ayuk, and somehow he comes up with a miraculous play. So a miraculous play, doink off the helmet of a Detroit defensive back. And there you go. 2 plays later, after the turnover on downs. Now, you're not telling me, you mean to tell me that the turnover on downs, the going for it, being up 14 points, 2 scores, rather than being up 17 and 3 scores, might have had a difference? Yeah. Because then on the very first play of the Lions' next drive, Jahmyr Gibbs fumbles and gives it back to San Fran. The Niners scored 21 unanswered. And then when they had that 3-point lead, that second 4th down attempt occurred. So Detroit was winning. They had a 17-point lead. Then it was cut to 14. And they had the opportunity to go back up 3 scores. All right? That is called momentum. For those of you who've never heard it, don't watch sports, don't care about it, what happened is called a momentum swing. And I followed sports my whole life. I know all about momentum. But the problem is the nerds, the analytics, they don't like it. Because momentum is it's unquantifiable. Clutchness is unquantifiable, right? Because in that article, this is the reason why I say that they don't like momentum. Because in that article, they go, quote, "But you have to recover. Dumb things happen. Welcome to the league." Really? Dumb things happen? Why do you think dumb things happen? And why do you think certain things go a certain way, right? Why did David Tyree catch that ball off his helmet? Why did Eli Manning, that same play, not get sacked after being grabbed several times and those defensive linemen being held? The play before it, Asante Samuel let a ball go through his hand. Momentum. Like I said, they don't like to talk about it because it's not quantifiable. You can't put it into a calculator. David Ortiz was the greatest clutch hitter to ever play baseball. But all the analytics say was that he was lucky, that those moments in being clutch don't matter. It was all luck, which is asinine. There is a psychological aspect to these decisions because later in that article, Ben Slowik, he talks about the, quote, "emotional value of taking the points is dramatically overstated at every turn." Really? Because he then later explains that, goes on to say that the Detroit being up 17 still obviously is not greater than the Niners' 21 unanswered run, which, well, duh, 21 points is greater than 17. Any idiot can figure that out. But what the nerd doesn't take into account is the fact that that 21 unanswered was when they were down 14 points, not 17. And it continues, with the second 4th down. He says that being down 3 points and kicking that field goal to tie the game, oh, that's okay. Yeah, sure. That's good for the players, right? That's good for the players. It's good for their mental capacity. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter, according to him, because he says, oh, well, that sounds a lot like retconning and conjecture to him. Well, that's exactly what you're doing when you say that Detroit being up 17 instead of 14, wouldn't have mattered, right? Isn't that the same thing? Because tying the game up on that second fourth down attempt, he's saying it's retconning and conjecture that Detroit would have come back and win. Well, him saying that the 21 unanswered being down 17 rather than being down 14, that's the same thing. It's retconning and conjecture. You have to think about it this way. Detroit's in an opposing building, up 17 midway through the third. They dominated the first half and are still putting up points. You don't think that's going through the Niners' head? Because the Niners are going to act differently being down 3 scores with 22 minutes remaining than being up 2. And so I look at Dan Campbell, and yeah, I want to say, Dan, what are you doing? Because he has this persona of F it, I'm a football guy. I'm a tough guy. Let's go. We're going to go for it, right? It's exciting. Well, not when you realize that the Lions have one of the biggest analytical teams in football. So to me, it's when the numbers say, oh, you're going to have a better chance of winning if you go for it. Doesn't mean you get it. If you go for it. How is that exciting? That's what I don't get, right? It's not exciting when I'm being told by numbers to go for it, to do it. Because there's no feel for the game. There's no feel for it. Now, if you want to talk about a feel and exciting and something similar, it was exciting when Belichick went for it on 4th and 2 in Indy back in 2009. It was exciting when Bill Belichick was waiting out Pete Carroll, trying to, right before the Malcolm, go, and then he intercepts the ball. That clock drain, that was exciting. It was exciting when the Pats had to go for 2 in Super Bowl 51 because they were down that much. It was exciting when Josh Beckett went 8 strong innings with 11 strikeouts in a must-win game in Cleveland in 2007. I mean, again, there are so many examples that analytics and nerds have no clue about. They will never know. And that's the problem that I have with analytics in sports. You can't quantify that competitiveness. You can't quantify that blood. You can't. Josh Beckett going 8 innings in Game 5 being down 3-1 in the ALCS. You think you're going to see that anymore? No. Because the numbers and the analytics will tell you that by the third go-around in the order, that starting pitcher is going to get shellacked. Josh Beckett didn't. I mentioned earlier, and I know I talked about a brief bit of this last week, and I mentioned earlier, we are at a war for the soul of our sports. The second article that I found by Will Leash in the Injecture, I think is what it's called, in New York. He opens with there are 2 different kinds of people. And he talks about how, the first kind is always open to new ideas, while the second kind is turned off and says, no, I'm good with my thoughts. Thank you. I'm good with what I know, and I'm the latter. Because in this case, that's the thing. When we're trying to input analytics and tell me, and the funny part was in that same paragraph, the opening paragraph, in that same paragraph, he goes on to say that the second group, my group, always loses. Hello? Did Detroit win on Sunday? Are they going to the Super Bowl? No, they're not. So I look at it, and one of the funnier parts about the article is that he calls Dan Campbell is talking about like a metalhead, like rah rah guy, and then he goes on to call him a former linebacker, where clearly this guy nerd didn't do enough research because Dan Campbell is a former tight end. But I digress. He talks about Bill James and how what he thought about the game, what his initial thoughts when he grew up were wrong because Bill James was Mr. Enlightenment, right? He praises the Lions like he praised the Moneyball A's or the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns. In other words, you get the ball, you run down the court, you shoot it with 7 seconds or less. You're going to put up so many shot attempts that you end up going to score a lot, which is going to lead you to a victory. That's what that means, 7 seconds or less Suns. And yet, here's the thing. What happened to those teams? That's right. They never won a thing. They never won anything. And so as I'm, the best part of the article, I think Will Leitch wrote was, quote, "This is not to say that analytics are the be-all, end-all of the NFL any more than they are in any other sport." Really? Because that's where I beg to differ. Both these articles are talking to me as if I am a caveman. I am out of my time. It is time to, Tim, suck it up. Numbers, nerds, and computers are going to be dictating every decision you make, every life choice you make, every sports move you make, the team you root for. That's what this is. I feel like that's what this is going towards. And you know what? Can't we just have a safe haven that is sports? Can't we have a safe haven where I can just be like, I am going to relax. I am not going to worry about what computers, geeks, nerds are telling me because it's not going to work because it's not exciting. Going for it on fourth down can be exciting when it's instinctual. The reason why Belichick went for it on fourth down in 2009 in Indy was because he knew his defense wasn't going to stop Peyton Manning, even if they punted, all the way across the field and gave them and won the field advantage battle. It wasn't going to work. So that's why he went for it. And Belichick is one of the least analytical coaches in the NFL, which I'm like, thank you. If there was one bright spot about Bill in his tenure recently, was that he was not an analytics guy. And that's what scares me about Gerard Mayo coming in and trying to bring in all these outside coaches. I mean, he's got Sean McVay disciples. He's got interviewing Kyle Shanahan disciples. And then too, once the draft finishes, all the scouts, all their contracts are up. So who are they going to bring in for the GM? Who are they going to bring in to fill all those roles? And what are their roles going to be? Right? Gerard Mayo is a football guy, former linebacker, played under Bill, and then he left. Then he worked at Optum. And then he came back into coaching, and he's all about this new age, this new wave. Now, I don't know if that new wave means analytics. I don't. But I am concerned that it could be that. Because if I find out that the Patriots did this on this type of situation because the numbers said so, then you have no feel for the game. That's why I can't stand it, is because these nerds, these computer programmers don't have a feel for the game. Because I'm telling you right now, there is something that is, I don't want to say mystical because, that is not crazy, but just it may not be the right word. But it doesn't give you that feel, right? It doesn't give you that. You don't have that feel for the game. You're not watching and seeing what's going on. Like I said, We're already in a situation where programs are controlling our lives. This phone right here, I can't tell you how often I'm on this phone, laptop, the mic, the camera, the microphone, everything. Instead of going outside, enjoying the scenery, this television right behind me, instead of experiencing life, going to all these different places, right? I'm trying to back away from that. But sports was always that. Sports was always that safe haven. You could take a step back, you can get away. But right now, if football gets taken over, there's no hope. There's no hope anymore. So, folks, we are in a war. We are in a war for the soul of our sports. So don't be afraid to speak up. Got a couple comments to start off. What's good, Tim? Have a great show. Long live the grid. That's right, Patrick. Long live the grid. Thank you. I appreciate it. And All Even Podcast, Barry Grant Jr. Analytics is ruining the game, not just because you set a record of fourth down aggression in the regular season doesn't mean you have to stay the course. Adapt and adjust to the moment. Exactly. That momentum, that feel for the game is really the biggest thing that you can't quantify. Clutchness. You can't quantify it, but you know it when you see it. If you watch sports as long as I have, you know those momentum swings when you see it. And I don't want this to ruin football. Baseball feels like it's already long gone. Basketball is on its way there. I mentioned it with the 3 points. It's greater than 2 points. And by the way, just want to throw this in there about those articles before I move on. Talk about the smugness and the arrogance of those nerds talking to people like me, who believe in that momentum and clutchness factor. The arrogance and the smugness of reading that, it was kind of infuriating, hence the reason why I'm talking about it right now, even though I know it's Detroit and the Lions and this is a Boston sports show, but I feel like it had to be brought up.